Clear water can still have problems and most people miss the signs. It's easy to assume that if water looks normal, it's fine to drink. No color, no smell, no obvious particles. That usually feels like enough. But water quality doesn't always reveal itself in obvious ways. In many cases, the early signs are subtle, easy to ignore. Sometimes they show up gradually, sometimes inconsistently. And because they're not dramatic, people often overlook them. So what should you actually be paying attention to? To understand that, you need to shift how you think about water. Instead of asking, does this look clean? The better question is this consistent? Because inconsistency is often the first signal that something might be off. One of the most common signs is a change in taste. Water that suddenly tastes metallic, bitter, or slightly different than usual can indicate a shift in what's present. This doesn't always mean something dangerous, but it does mean something has changed. And when something changes without a clear reason, it's worth noticing. Another sign is odor. If water has a chlorine-like smell, that can be part of normal treatment. But if the smell becomes stronger than usual, or if there's a new scent like sulfur or something musty, that's a sign that conditions may be different than before. Again, not always a serious issue, but not something to ignore either. Then there's appearance. Most people look for cloudiness or discoloration. And those can be clear indicators when they happen. But appearance can also change in more subtle ways. For example, water that looks slightly dull instead of clear. Or tiny air bubbles that linger longer than expected. These small details can point to changes in pressure, temperature, or content. Another overlooked sign is residue. If you start noticing buildup on faucets, glassware, or inside kettles, that's often a sign of mineral content or other elements in the water. This doesn't necessarily make the water unsafe, but it does indicate what's passing through your system on a daily basis. And over time, that matters. There's also the behavior of appliances. If things like coffee makers, dishwashers, or water heaters start showing reduced efficiency or buildup, it can be connected to water quality. These systems interact with water constantly, so they often reflect changes before you notice them directly. But here's where it becomes more important. Sometimes, the signs aren't in the water itself but in how you feel after using it. For example, recurring minor discomfort after drinking water, or changes in how your skin reacts after showering. These are not definitive indicators on their own, but when they appear alongside other signs, they can add context. The key is not to jump to conclusions but to look for patterns. Because isolated events happen, but repeated signals, even small ones, suggest something worth investigating. Another factor to consider is location. Water quality can vary not just by city, but by neighborhood, and even by building. Two homes on the same street can experience different conditions depending on plumbing, pipe materials, and how water flows through the system. So relying only on general reports may not give you the full picture. What matters is what's happening at your specific point of use. That's why personal observation becomes important. Not in a technical sense, but in a practical, everyday way. Paying attention to consistency, noticing when something changes, and asking simple questions when it does. Now, this doesn't mean you need to constantly worry about your water. In many cases, systems work as intended. But it does mean that blind trust isn't the only option. Awareness gives you a middle ground. You're not assuming everything is perfect. And you're not assuming everything is wrong. You're simply observing. And that's where small adjustments can start. Some people choose to test their water periodically. Others use basic filtration methods to reduce variability. And some begin looking into ways to have more direct control over how their water is handled at home. Not necessarily complex setups, but practical approaches that reduce uncertainty. Because the goal isn't to react to every possible issue. It's to create a more stable and predictable experience. The key insight here is simple. Unsafe water doesn't always announce itself clearly. It often shows up through small, repeated signals over time. And the more you pay attention to those signals, the easier it becomes to make informed decisions. You don't need to become an expert. You just need to recognize when something is different and take that as a cue to look a little closer. In the end, water is something you use every day. You drink it, cook with it, clean with it. So even small inconsistencies, repeated over time, can become relevant. Not because they always lead to problems, but because they represent variables you might not be accounting for. And once you start noticing those variables, you have more options. You can ignore them. You can monitor them. or you can take steps to reduce them. If you want to explore how some people are creating a more controlled and consistent water setup at home, there's a resource in the description that outlines a simple approach using basic components. It walks through the structure step by step so you can understand how it works and decide if it makes sense for your situation. And if you want more content like this focused on practical awareness and everyday systems, consider subscribing. Because the more you notice, the better decisions you make.